In this African folktale, dogs barked every time an Akara seller passed. The people laughed, until the barking stopped. When morning came, she was gone. The truth arrived too late. Once upon a time in Olorunfemi Street, Lagos, a street that remembered everything, nothing happened quietly. Olorunfemi Street had a memory. It remembered who paid their electricity on time, which child had learned a new prayer, whose chicken never laid eggs, and the exact hour the Akara seller arrived every week. On that street, nobody's silence went unnoticed and nobody's laughter stayed private. Life there moved with the steady, honest rhythm of small things. Morning radios, yawns, hot oil sizzling in metal pans. Before dawn, the street already breathed. Kerosene lamps winked out as the sky lightened. Men in work shirts threaded their way past laundry lines. School bags bumped knees. Baba Ad sat on his creaking wooden chair like a weather-beaten judge. Transistor radio dug into the crook of his elbow, eyes half closed but always listening. He spoke when words mattered and otherwise kept them for later. Chidinma ran errands for her mother's provision shop across from the mechanic's yard. She was quick with a smile and quicker with gossip. Even when she was young, she understood that stories were the currency of Olorunfemi. Mr. Benson, who kept 2 fat goats and an even fatter pair of dogs by a rusted gate, could be counted on to complain about anything new, especially new faces. So when the scent of frying Akara rose like a promise and threaded itself through the morning air, it swept the street into motion. It arrived before the seller did, the warm, nutty smell of ground beans meeting hot oil, that small, electric hiss that makes you forget you were ever sleepy. It was the kind of smell that pulled people out of their houses in slippers. She set up without ceremony. A battered tin tray, a shallow pan, a wooden stool, a kerosene stove that coughed and then settled into a steady glow. Her hands moved patient and practiced. Scoop, press, drop, lift. The rhythm of someone who had done this for longer than the street had remembered her name. Her Akara came out in perfect rounds, browned at the edges, soft in the middle, and each one was handed over with a polite nod and a quick, almost shy smile. People started to come. The men who fixed roofs stopped for 2 wrapped in newspaper and 8 standing. Students slipped coins across the tray between their exams and breakfast. Even the old women on the corner, who pretended not to notice anything useful, came close enough to ask about salt. Her food was good. Better, some said with mouths full, than the Akara from the corner market. She wasn't loud. She didn't shout, chant, or promise miracles like some sellers did. Her voice was low, words like small offerings. She called herself Mama Yabo when someone asked. She gave no more than that. She worked with the small, efficient economy of a person who kept what they had close and spent little. 2 children stood behind her, eyes sharp and hands ready, and a young man, the one who took the money, moved like someone who had learned to keep his face unreadable. For weeks, the tray became a little island of morning pleasure. People praised her food the way old friends praise old stories, without exaggeration but with a warmth that made you believe. The street warmed to her the way the oil warmed the tray. Gradually, naturally, deals were struck, quarrels were paused, new jokes invented. Chidinma recommended her to friends. Baba Ad nodded when someone spoke well of the Akara. In his silence there was the seal of neighborhood approval. And yet, even as the line grew and laughter returned to mornings, there were small things that did not fit the pattern of simple success. Mama Yabo accepted greetings with a smile that did not reach the eyes. She moved quickly when large groups gathered too close, as if crowds were currents she wanted to cross and leave. Her children kept to the stall even during the hottest parts of the day, blinking at sun glare like they seldom slept deeply. The young man who took the money avoided eye contact. He counted coins with the intensity of a man doing sums to keep calm. Neighbors noticed these things in the way people notice a missing stitch in a well-made shirt. They saw it, made a note, and then returned to their errands. Olorunfemi Street was not unkind. It was cautious. People welcomed newcomers, but they also measured them. And when something measured wrong, they saved their questions for later. That later never came fast. The tray stayed busy. The Akara was folded into newspapers and into the hands of children whose laughter made the morning lighter. Folks told their friends and the line stretched like a ribbon down the road. If you asked Baba Ad, he would say the street had a rhythm and this new song fit well enough. If you asked Chidinma, she'd tell you how the Akara tasted like Saturday mornings. But if you watched closely, if you watched the way Mama Yabo's eyes flicked to the gate every so often, or the way her hands hesitated at sudden noise, you would see the thin, quiet thread of something else. Not yet a warning, not yet a story. Just a small, restless rustle at the edge of well-worn life. And in places like Olorunfemi Street, small rustles have a way of turning into the kind of questions that keep people awake. Dogs have a way of noticing what people pretend not to see. For the first few mornings after Mama Yabo's Akara stall opened, the dogs of Olorunfemi did what dogs always did. They barked at passing scooters, at the neighbor's goat, at the persistent cat that stole scraps. Mr. Benson's pair, two stout animals with slack mouths and soft bellies, were the loudest voices on the block. They barked when children ran, when the mechanic's apprentice slammed a bonnet, when the early sun hit a nail just so and made someone swear. Then, without fanfare, the barking changed. It wasn't a single growl or one-off alarm. It was a pattern. The dogs erupted only when Mama Yabo or her family crossed in front of Mr. Benson's gate. A low, hard sound that started in the chest and became teeth and noise. When the young man at the stall counted money, they barked. When one of the children stepped away to rinse a pan, they barked. When Mama Yabo bent to retrieve a wrapped Akara, they hurled themselves at the gate as if something inside had pricked them. At first, people laughed. Dogs will be dogs, Mr. Benson said, half joking, half annoyed. He pulled their leashes, gave them a tug, limited the barking to a hiccup of sound. But the animals would not be settled. They paced, they circled, eyes fixed on the stall, ears tuned like twin radio antennas. The sound they made was not playful. It had a meaning the street couldn't name. Neighbors began to notice the pattern. Not in full alarm, but as one notices the odd shape of a cloud before it rains. Chai Dinma, who spent mornings running errands and collecting gossip, walked past the gate and felt the chorus shift under her feet. They always bark at something, she told a friend over the fence. But it's only when that woman comes. She said it like a curiosity, not a concern. Curiosity, on Olorunfemi Street, was the first step toward a story. People began to test it without meaning to. Someone would prod, see if they bark at me. They did not. An old man shuffled by with a cane and nothing stirred. The dogs ignored the cat, the scooters, the stray radio salesman except for Mama Yabo's family. The specificity tightened the neighborhood's attention like a string drawn taut. Small observations multiplied. The young man who handled the money, quiet, sharp-eyed, kept his head down when people joked. Once, when a loud motorcycle backfired, he flinched so hard his hand jabbed the tray. The dogs went from barking to a deeper, strange sound. A whine threaded into the noise. Then back again. When he froze, the barking paused for a single second, like the animals were listening to the same thing he was. The family's odd habits began to collect in people's mouths. They accepted greetings with polite nods, but avoided conversation. They ate quickly, seldom stayed to talk. At midday, when the sun hung like a coin over the roofs, Mama Yabo and the children remained close to the tray, as if the stall were a small walled room and the world outside a wide place to be feared. Folks noticed how the children blinked at bright light, how they jumped at sudden shouts. People said children grew like that because of hunger. Others felt it was something else. There were jokes. Always jokes. Maybe the Akara is too hot for them. Someone suggested, and laughter wrapped around the comment like a shawl. Yet laughter didn't dissolve the feeling that tightened after each bark. The dog's noise made ordinary mornings stop, like a dropped spoon rings a kitchen. Rumors curled in from the edges. Some said the family were from far away, from a place where people spoke differently. Others, leaning on older stories, muttered about spirits and returns. Someone else, practical and tired, suggested they were running from trouble. Debt, a jealous man, some private quarrel. Each theory found a home in someone's head, and then grew, fed by the street's appetite for story. Baba Ad watched it all from his chair, radio clasped to the crook of his arm. He was a man of small words and long memory. If he frowned, the street noticed. He remembered a time when animals had warned the neighborhood of fires and when children's silence had meant a sickness spreading. He did not speak of spirits lightly. Still, he squinted more than once at the gate when the dogs raised the alarm, as if trying to find a human reason to put the noise to rest. The young mothers began to steer their children away, not out of cruelty but caution. They wrapped bread tighter, pulled its sleeves, and gave the stall a wide berth when possible. Phones came out. People filmed the dogs and the short, sharp sequence of emotion they made. Clips moved across screens, trimmed and shared with captions that begged for answers. Why are dogs barking at a carouseller? Someone typed, and the comments filled with guesses. Animals can see things. Something's off. Maybe she's hiding. The neighborhood's rhythm changed in small ways. Morning converged on the gate where the dogs lived. People lingered longer at the sight of the barking. The line at the stall slowed, then lengthened again as curiosity and hunger did what they do best: compete. The Akara sold well, but people began to watch with their mouths full, eyes darting, piecing together the small puzzle. And underneath all the small observations, like a low drumbeat beneath conversation, There was a question growing louder than the dogs themselves. If the animals were responding to something real, what were they hearing that the rest of Olorunfemi could not? That question waited, patient and hungry, at the edge of the morning. It would not be answered by jokes or by videos. It wanted a night with fireworks and a morning with an empty tray. Events that had a way of turning questions into stories. New Year's Eve on Olorunfemi had a particular kind of electricity. The street buzzed early. Children trading sparklers, shopkeepers stacking goods, old men rehearsing prayers they would say when the clock struck 12. Even the usual quarrel softened into a background hum of preparation. It was the night you told your neighbor a joke and meant it as a blessing. The Akara stall, which had become something like a morning ritual, should have gone quiet that night. Instead, Mama Yabo kept her little stove lit. The tray glowed under the same lamp she used every dawn. Oil still hissed and popped as if daring the dark to interrupt. People asked why she stayed late, and she only smiled. A small, flat smile that did not reach the corners of her eyes. Her children moved stiffly, passing wrapped Akara with hands that trembled once, then steadied. Fireworks started early. On a street like Olorunfemi, people didn't wait for midnight. They tested rockets and cracked sparklers to see who could make the loudest cheer. At first, the dogs reacted like dogs do, barks and lunges at unexpected sounds. But under the random noise, the dogs' pattern remained. Their attention sat on the stall like a claim. The first planted sign was small and almost embarrassingly ordinary. A motorcycle backfired 2 houses down, and the young man who counted the money jolted as if struck. His hand lashed out, knocking a wrapped Akara to the ground. For a second he froze, eyes wide, chest rising fast. The dog's barking did not swell then. It became a different thing entirely. A high, worried whine pressed between each bark, as if the animals had recognized something in the man's sudden panic. Later, when someone set off a string of loud rockets near the mechanic's yard, the husband, a broad-shouldered man who mostly kept to the background, put his palm flat against the stall's wooden post. He held it there, fingers white at the knuckles, as though steadying himself against a remembered force. The dogs rolled forward into fury, then, as if answering something only they and the man felt, broke off mid-bark for a heartbeat. In that fraction of time, the whole street seemed to hold its breath. Another sign lived in light. Neighbors began to notice the small way the lights inside the stall blinked on and off at odd hours, not with the measured rhythm of a tired seller, but with the staccato of someone checking the street. Once, long after most had stopped watching, Baba Ad glanced up and saw Mama Yabo's shadow move through the slit of the doorway. She stopped, listened hard, and then leaned close to the young man and murmured something so quiet it might have been the wind. He stiffened, and the dogs answered with a doubled anxious bark. People recorded these moments, and the clips spread across phones. The hand freeze, the flash of light, the whine threaded through the barking. Comments filled with speculation. Did you see him flinch? Why are there lights on? And the neighborhood's collective curiosity grew teeth. But no one yet had the facts, only impressions. The children at the stall stared too. They blinked at bright light the way someone who has not slept properly blinks at noon sun. When sparklers showered light across the street and laughter rose, one of the children flinched and pressed closer to Mama Yabo, fingers lacing around her apron as if to anchor themselves. It was the kind of small fear that people usually dismiss as shyness, until it repeats. Near midnight, the atmosphere shifted. Celebrations swelled. People hugged, elders lifted their faces toward the sky, and for a moment the street felt whole and hopeful. But under that chorus, the dogs had been restless all night, their barking peaking with every new noise. Then, as if someone had closed a window, they fell quiet. It was a silence so sharp it made people look twice. For weeks, the dogs' barking had been the alarm that stitched the mornings together, now that stitch lay slack. The sudden hush left the street exposed in a way that laughter never could. People glanced at one another, then at the stall. Someone moved closer and saw the tray, still warm, a half-eaten Akara left where a customer had dropped it in a hurry. The lamp inside the stall flicked once, twice, then held steady. There was one last small sight that snagged on folks' minds. A neighbor, returning from setting off a final firework, paused by the gate and glimpsed the young man at the stall. He was on his knees, not in prayer, but bent over the tray like a man trying to find something in spilled coins. The neighbor swore later that the young man mouthed words that might have been names, or might have been a counting of breaths. His voice was too low to hear, but his shoulders shook as if he had been holding in a breath too long. Those who watched that night felt an ache that had nothing to do with curiosity. It was the kind of ache you get when you see someone trying to hold back a storm and you know you cannot provide shelter. The fireworks burned out, the last sparkler died in a child's hands, and the street exhaled a tired prayer that it would be a better year. In the quiet that followed, people drifted toward their homes.
Phones went dark, laughter thinned, and the street's watchmen returned to their chairs. No one had expected what came next. Not because it was sudden, but because the signs had been so small, like loose threads in a well-made cloth. Some would say later that the dogs fell silent because whatever they had warned about was gone. Others would say the silence was the only thing that made the morning possible. For now, the night closed around Olorunfemi Street with a hush that felt heavier than any cheer. The small signs had done their work. They had set the stage for a morning that would leave the whole street asking a question it could not yet answer.
Morning on Olorunfemi came the way it always did. Slow and certain, a soft pressing of light between roofs. But that morning the light fell on an absence the way it can fall on a missing tooth in a grin. You notice it first, then everything else seems off-kilter. Someone was the first to speak. It was the boy who sold sweet cold drinks 2 doors down. He wandered past the gate and froze. The tray at Mama Yabo's stall was still warm. A half-wrapped Akara lay where a hand had dropped it in haste. The lamp that should have been put out had burned down to a small, patient ember. No chair sat where the young man had counted coins. No smoke drifted from the little pan. The dogs lay at their gate like 2 sleepy pieces of the morning, tails flicking now and then, mouths open in easy panting. They no longer barked. People gathered quickly. Neighbors are good at gathering. Chidinma arrived with her school bag still slung crooked, face bright with the habit of morning gossip. Baba Ad shuffled out in his slippers, the radio tucked under his arm like an old confidante. Mr. Benson stood at his gate, jaw slack. His goats bleated as if confused by the change. What happened? Someone asked, because some questions are just bones that need a voice. A neighbor, the one who'd gone out late to set off a final rocket, answered before he thought. They're gone, he said. No pack, nothing. The tray. Still warm. The street pushed toward the stall like a tide. Fingers touched the tin tray, tasted the oil on their hands, sniffed the air as if the truth might hang in the heat. Then a small, ordinary memory surfaced. One that made the breath leave more people's chests than the empty space itself. Late that night, the neighbor remembered, he had paused by the stall returning from his fireworks. He'd seen the young man drop to his knees by the tray and mutter something under his breath. Names, perhaps, or a hurried prayer. He'd whispered, "Too many eyes." It's time. The words had been small, but in the hush they landed like a stone in a calm pool. The hush that followed had meaning now. It folded into the morning and made sense of the other small things everyone had seen but shrugged away, the way the lights blinked at odd hours, the children who flinched at bright sparks, the husband who braced himself against the post when rockets thudded. The man who handled the coins had been counting more than money. He had been counting moments. When to leave, how fast, how soon. Baba Ad stood and let the radio hang from his hand. He had lived long enough to know the difference between malice and fear. He remembered a time when a neighbor's silence had meant a sickness. He remembered another time when a child's eyes had been the first sign of trouble. They weren't evil, he said slowly, as if learning the words aloud would make them truer. They were running. The truth, when it arrived, did not come as a revelation so much as a folding in of the signs that had been there all along. Years ago, the husband had been mixed in a dispute. Land and money, the sort of argument that eats at men until someone gets hurt. Someone had died in that mess. The family had fled, changing names and streets the way some people change clothes. They kept pockets light and voices lower than the market noise. Their silence had been a shield. The dogs had not been barking at wickedness. They'd been barking at panic. Dogs hear heartbeats in a way people forget, sense breath and sweat, and the tremor of someone who sleeps with one eye open. Where human eyes saw only foreignness, the animals smelled the residue of fear like a salt the wind left behind. Neighbors turned inward, and the street began to ask questions it had saved. Why hadn't anyone asked earlier? Why had curiosity been left as gossip instead of a hand? Faces that had laughed at jokes now hung with something heavier. Shame, perhaps, or a dull ache like a bruise. Chidinma moved closer to the empty tray and, without thinking, wrapped the remaining half-eaten Akara in the corner of an old newspaper. She set it down on the step as if leaving something for someone who might return for the heat of a last bite. Others followed small motions. A woman placed a plastic cup of water on the wooden post where the family used to lean. Baba Ad, who rarely spoke in more than a sentence, leaned his radio against the stall and turned the volume just a fraction louder. It felt like a little ceremony, awkward, human, and late. They found a scrap of paper later tucked into the handle of the tray, a list of names and a single, hurried line. An address, perhaps a promise to meet, a plan. The handwriting was not frantic, just small and tight, like someone trying to keep fear inside their own chest. It confirmed what the street feared to know. They had left because staying had become dangerous. For a while, people walked through the rest of that day as if wearing someone else's shoes.
The Akara stall's absence made Olorunfemi feel like an instrument missing its string. Conversations bent toward what-ifs. What if we had knocked on their door? What if we had offered a place to sleep? What if the jokes had been turned into questions instead? By evening, the street did something it had not done before. When a new face arrived the next week, someone went out to greet them. Not once, but twice. The first greeting offered food as it always had. The second, quieter question asked whether the stranger needed anything at all. It was not a grand ritual, but small practices seed habit. People began to notice differently. They listened longer when a neighbor's voice shifted in the middle of a sentence. The dogs settled back into their old rhythms over time, barking again at scooters and cats and the crank of a motorcycle. But the memory of that long, unanswering barking stayed with Olorunfemi Street in a patch of tenderness that made it gentler, if only a little. They had been taught by what they had failed to see. When the sun sank and lights blinked on in the windows, someone would still pause by the place where the tray had been. They would look at the empty space and remember the half-eaten Akara, the lamp's small ember, the whispered words. Too many eyes. It's time.
And the street learned, in the small, stubborn way communities do, that the smallest alarms are sometimes the most urgent. A dog's bark, a child's blink, a light that never quite goes out. They learned to ask before rumor did the work of answer. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Afrotales by Siri.